Stevens runs something called the Utility of the Future, which I think we're going to learn all about, and it sounds very promising. We'll start with 20 minutes and roll from there. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Nick. Hopefully this is a straightforward bingo. Anyway, lots of great topics. Investing and how we present ourselves is important. Actually, delivering is also important. I love the earlier discussions from Rob on long-duration storage. You know, we've heard about hydrogen, heard about waste to energy. I'm going to share with you a little bit of the utility perspective as we are embarking on this amazing journey to decarbonize our society. It is impacting customers. It's impacting creating opportunities for developers. It's creating opportunity for better transparency on investing and what companies are doing from a governance and stewardship. But it's also going to require some infrastructure in the street, you know, and around the city. So that hopefully I'll bring a little bit of that. New York's goals are pretty ambitious. We're going to get to 70% renewables in 7 years. We're probably about 30% now, so we've got a good bit to go. We're going to be 100% clean on the power side by 2040, so no carbon on the electric side. But we're not going to stop there. We've got to approach the whole economy, which means tackling home heating, tremendous deployment of electric heat pumps to replace current natural gas, oil, propane in some other areas. Tremendous investment in electric vehicles. We got to figure out where are we going to charge them. You know, we're already seeing some street side electric vehicle charging, which is great in some neighborhoods. As a city kid born and bred, growing up on alternate side of the street, parking regulations, having to move your car every other day. Now you have to move it and find a spot where you can charge up as well. So it's going to change people's behavior. But at the end of the day, hopefully it encourages us to use more of the best electric transportation system we have, which is subways and trains, or pretty soon city bikes. If the weather was nicer, you would have seen me bring in my bike helmet, but when the weather's bad, I pass on that. Anyway, in addition to the CLCPA, the state's climate law, the governor has proposed, and coming out of the Climate Action Council, a cap and invest. So instead of just carrots, we're also have the potential to, maybe a stick's the wrong word, at reasonable pricing of carbon usage. So in my mind, that's going to be the key tool. We can't just have the Public Service Commission say to the gas and electric utilities, here are the incentives you should be giving that at the end of the day drive up some cost of doing business, without also addressing what's the alternatives, which is diesel, gasoline, oil for heating. And if we don't find a way to value the carbon in those, we're not going to be able to encourage customers to come off of diesel fuel and go to electric transportation, or come off of home heating oil and go to heat pumps. In addition, we heard mentioned earlier that New York City has perhaps more of a stick approach, saying buildings over 25,000 feet have to get to certain reductions and certain benchmarking, otherwise they will be exposed to potential financial incentives for not doing that. From a distribution perspective, we're still going to have to deliver that clean electricity with the increased utilization of electric vehicles and heat pumps. We are seeing electric load growth, and especially in the wintertime. Some projections are by 2035, we will be a winter peaking utility, joining some of our Canadian colleagues who've been winter peaking for a long time. So how do we do it smartly and help customers along? At the end of the day, we will need to give customers incentives to encourage them to adopt the right technology. We will need to be investing in transmission and distribution systems to deliver that clean power. We're also going to have to work with them so they understand when they plug in their electric vehicle or set up their Nest thermostat or whatever their more sophisticated building management system for a bigger building like this, how do you charge it how do you run your HVAC in a way that reflects not just your cost, but the cleanliness of the grid? Can you anticipate when there will be cleaner power so that you can plan your operating strategies around what the grid is doing? And that's going to be important from the grid as well, so we can, not have to build for everybody charging up their electric vehicle at the same time, but we can achieve some diversity. One of the things we're investing in is a distribution energy resource management system, DERMS. We have in our current rate case, which is subject to PSC approval, but we reached a settlement, we're going to invest about $40 million over the next 3 years to create better visibility as to what customers are doing, not just for our benefit, but to also help the DER investors and customers operate their distribution equipment smarter. One of the key things is in the wholesale market, the New York ISO that manages the state's grid has a rule which allows distributed resources to directly participate with aggregators in those markets. So one of the byproducts of this is to enable those customers with EVs, with batteries, with all sorts of emerging technologies to directly participate, so they can provide spinning reserves and ancillary services and actually get paid by the wholesale market to provide those services. That not only will open up a revenue stream for those customers, but by participating, it will reduce the cost of achieving some of those states' goals, because effectively the wholesale market will be helping pay for the batteries and the clean technologies that customers are adopting. So we've got a process where we're going to be setting up basically a registration portal, a database to keep track of it all, and a system impact tool. From a customer perspective, we've got detailed maps of our system to help customers and developers understand where are portions of the system that can readily accommodate solar, electric vehicles, and energy storage, and where are the spots that are going to have that are already saturated, which would be more expensive to adopt some of those technologies. Shifting from the distribution side, there's also a big need for the transmission investments that are necessary to bring the clean power to New York City. Historically, New York State has been this tale of two grids. Lots of renewables upstate. Originally, the New York Power Authority's hydro resources basically got us to 25% renewables for the last, 80 years or so. We've had a head start. It's taken a little while to get some momentum, but we're investing in a lot of large land-based wind and solar upstate that's actually has, for the most part, gotten New York, the north of New York City, to about 85% renewable, which is impressive. The problem is when you come down into New York City itself and Long Island, it's about the reverse. We're about 15% renewable. So we've got a long way to go. A couple of big transmission lines will help. Champlain Hudson Express, bringing some Canadian hydro right into Astoria, Queens, as well as a Clean Path line to bring some upstate renewables into New York City, will be great additions. Once those are interconnected, that will not only reduce the need to operate in-city and Long Island fossil generation, but it'll allow for some of the retirement of peaking units that have been operating in the system. Not only can we back down some of those legacy fossil units, they'll be able to retire. Once they retire, it's sort of like a chicken and egg. That creates interconnection points for other clean resources to connect. We've also had some load pockets where historically we've designed the electric system around generation to meet local reliability with local generation. That has meant that there are some 1970s era combustion turbines that are not very efficient and not very clean, but actually are needed occasionally to keep the lights on. And we are putting in some 138,000 volt transmission lines under a program called the Reliable Clean Cities to allow those units to retire in 2024 and 2025 when the DEC will basically mandate that they have to retire because of their NOx emissions, which will be higher than acceptable levels. Also mention a little bit that load growth. We need to look at transmission to interconnect our new substations. Our transmission system, if you want to view it as like sort of a superhighway at the 345,000 volt level, nice big backbone that moves power around, great for large interconnections like offshore wind, not so good for, it then steps down to 138,000 volts, which is a good kind of intermediate, still high voltage, but not big enough for 1,000 or 1,200 or 1,400 megawatt projects, which is what the offshore wind is being sized at. Probably pretty good for some of the energy storage projects that we will also need to balance the intermittency of that. So what's our challenges? Effectively, you know, the existing interconnection points are already being used by existing generators. We can't retire those until we get new injections coming in. We have existing stations that are sandwiched into urban areas that would be hard to expand outwards because in many cases the real estate isn't always there to extend out the substation, or in some cases build it two-story, which gets very expensive. So what we are looking to do is, so here's another view of all of the interconnections in New York, in the New York ISO queue proposing to interconnect into the Con Edison system. We have a lot of interest on Staten Island. The problem is there's a natural bottleneck to bring it from Staten Island to the rest of the city, and a lot of spots elsewhere that are of great interest, but do not have open breaker positions and are not well suited now for power flows coming in. So as a result, we have proposed, nothing's cheap in New York, a $1 billion substation in Brooklyn, a new 345 kV substation to create new interconnection points for offshore wind, and also to supply new lower voltage transmission. This would be a high voltage transmission station to supply a lower voltage area substation that would feed portions of Brooklyn that are experiencing a lot of load growth and relieve some of the flows that are coming out of some of our Queens substations. Picture's worth 1,000 words. Here's kind of our system now. We've got this high voltage 345,000 volt line that then feeds lower networks, steps down to 138 kV, and then comes into these networks typically at either 13,000 volts or 27,000 volts, depending on which borough they're in. Our proposal is to basically pick up those transmission lines that are interconnecting our two high voltage stations and build a new station that would be designed from scratch, that would have the ability to accept new injections of offshore wind, that would then shift some of the load and diversify how we're supplying it, and allow for a new supply coming into the Brooklyn area, a new gateway area substation that we're also proposing in our rate case. So this is probably planning out 2027, 28, 29, 2030 is the time frame for pulling off all of this. And that's the end of my presentation. So happy to take some questions, talk about how we're investing and some of the challenges to really help New York get to its clean energy goals.
Thank you for the presentation. David Ulrich here with FSIM. I actually spent a lot of years developing systems such as those ones myself, so I understand the complexity. But my question is related to funding. I'm assuming you guys get funded through either a mix of public and private partnerships, or getting the kilowatt hours from the consumers, right? Are you considering or allowing the wind farms that will be feeding the power into the grid to generate either voluntary or compliance credits of some kind? Is that in the equation of the business case here?
So the utility business case, we're regulated by, for the most part, by the state. Occasionally, some of our components are regulated by the federal government and subject to a New York ISO rate. But we go in, I was referring to our rate case. technically, we can file for rates every year. What we typically do is propose every 3 years a proposal. If we are successful negotiating with various parties, some of whom are in the room, we might reach an agreement called a joint proposal, and that's what's currently filed publicly in front of the State Commission. If that's approved, that will set our rates for this year, next year, and the year after. So we kind of do it 3 years at a time. It's a regulated rate of return based on the equity that we put in and a pass-through effectively of the debt to finance it. We're at a 50-50. Your question is, though, how about the offshore wind developers? New York has an approach, like many states, where the environmental attribute is valued. New York's approach is to have a central purchase of that. A state agency called NYSERDA buys all of the RECs, is paying for basically the environmental attribute of those, the hydropower that'll come in on our Champlain-Hudson Express line. Will pay for the offshore wind from all of those offshore wind projects, and is already allowing existing land-based wind and solar to produce a renewable energy credit that typically has traded in the $20 to $25 a megawatt hour range. Some of that is fungible with New England, so if one state exceeds its goal, you will see the natural, opportunistic, view of let me schedule it into whichever market is valuing it the most.
How about all the emission reductions produced by this new grid that you're designing?
So,
There's going to be a lot of efficiencies, so I'm assuming there's going to be a reduction of emissions.
Question is, how about the emissions reductions? The renewable energy credit is supposed to be the proxy for that carbon value. The governor's proposal to implement a cap and invest will likely, if it's, assuming it's passed, would put an explicit carbon value on it. New York currently participates in the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, so we do try to price carbon. Last time, I think we're about $12 a ton. When we do energy efficiency programs, our state commission asks us to value carbon based on an old EPA under the Obama era using a 3% discount rate. It's about $40 a ton. Where those cap and invest allowances come out, we'll have to see what the legislation says and what sort of trading of those allowances. But I would if it is passed, it will explicitly value that carbon that is implicit in the renewable energy credit. Time for another question or two?
One more. We'll go to the back here.
And we can chat over lunch if you want to follow up.
Hi, I'm a reporter at Argus Media. I cover cap and trade programs, so I was going to ask you about the New York cap and invest proposal. I guess because based on what's out there, it's unclear. It's economy-wide, but it's unclear how the state's going to navigate the New York's existing participation in RGGI. So I guess how are you at Con Ed planning around and navigating that policy uncertainty? And I guess what ideal program in the end would you like to see?
So we are waiting to see what NYSERDA and the DEC come out with their proposal. Assuming it is modeled after the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, which there's been some public statements from some of the folks on NYSERDA working on that. They have described it looking for mechanisms that would have, sort of bound the outcomes like the RGGI program did, which is very important. So it does not result in big price swings, but it obviously creates, first of all, the parity to value carbon across the economy, because right now we're really only valuing it on the natural gas and electricity that the utilities sell. It's not, economy-wide, so there's a little mismatch between what the cost to a customer buying fuel oil or other products is versus the carbon included value of some of the electricity they may buy. So it will help that. It will also create a funding source for a lot of the programs the governor has described that should be very good for customers decarbonizing.
With that, thank you very much.
Thank you.